Hello and welcome to the Adventures of George Washington. I am your host, Professor Worthington. George Washington refused the opportunity to be a dictator. He supported free speech, he advocated for the division of governmental power, and he believed in the separation of church and state. These revolutionary ideas represented a change in political thinking. Where did he get these ideas? On this channel, we have been examining the books Washington read that influenced his philosophy on life. Today we continue with the lessons Washington learned from reading about the Protestant Reformation in two books. The first was Tobias Smollett's A Complete History of England, and the second was Richard Baker's A Chronicle of the Kings of England, from the time of the Roman government unto the death of King James. From their pages, Washington drew lessons about power, governance, and the limits every leader must accept. King Edward VI assumed the crown of England in 1547 when he was 9 years old. Since Edward could not officially rule the nation until the age of 15, his father, King Henry VIII, had made provisions in his will that a council called the Regency should administer the government until Edward reached the proper age. In keeping with his philosophy of balancing Catholic and Protestant influence in England, Henry had appointed men with a mixture of religious beliefs to the Regency. However, upon his death, the Protestant members of the council quickly dismissed the Catholic members and elevated Reformation loyalists to take their place. As a young George Washington read about these events in his copy of Tobias Smollett's A Complete History of England, they no doubt made an impression on his political philosophy.
The eyes of Henry VIII were no sooner closed than the friends of the Reformation congratulated themselves on the event. They no longer suppressed their sentiments on religion, but maintained their doctrines openly in preaching and teaching, even while the laws continued against them in full force. Indeed, at this juncture, they had very little to fear from their adversaries. Wow! Even though the laws were supposed to protect all religious beliefs, the Protestant reformers used their power to ignore the laws and force their beliefs upon everyone. I wonder what else Smollett says about the Protestant Reformation. The Protestants in Germany had received a private supply of 50,000 crowns from the Regency, which was resolved to seize this favorable conjuncture for promoting the Reformation. Unbelievable! They were using tax dollars to promote religious events. That should be illegal.
Once in charge of the government, the Protestant reformers used their power to change the laws by influencing the young king's thinking and behavior. They convinced him to endorse the Uniformity Act of 1548, which made the Protestant religion the sole legal form of worship in England. As a result, many Catholic rituals became illegal. These restrictions were even imposed on the king's older half-sister, Mary, who was a devout Catholic like her mother, Catherine of Aragon.
I wonder what Richard Baker has to say about these events in his book. It seems that some of the Catholics sent a letter to the King's Council asking for permission to conduct their religious services according to their own doctrine and beliefs. Let's see, what did the Regency do in response? Here it is on page 303. It says that the Regency sent the king's army against the Catholics, slaying the greatest part of them. The rest fled. Many were taken and executed by martial law. The chief leaders were sent to London and there executed. Wow, what an authoritarian response. Instead of imposing their religious beliefs on the entire population, shouldn't they have been concerned about the economy? Let's go back to Smollett and see what we can find. Here we are. Starting at page 134, it says when the monasteries were suppressed, a prodigious number of monks were obliged to earn their subsistence by their labor, so that every species of business was overstocked. The lands of the monasteries had been formerly farmed out to common people, so as to employ a great number of hands, and the rents being moderate, they were able to maintain their families on the profits of agriculture. But now, these lands being possessed by the nobility, the rents were raised, and the farmers, perceiving that wool was a better commodity than corn, turned all their fields into a pasture ground. This practice was attended with diverse inconveniences. The price of meal increased, to the unspeakable hardship of the lower class of people, and, as few hands were required to manage pasture grounds, a great number of poor was utterly deprived of subsistence, while the nation was filled with murmurs and complaints against the nobility, who were the sources of this misfortune. So basically, Smollett is saying that the authoritarian government favored the wealthy and made the common people worse off. The policies increased inflation, which increased the profits of the wealthy, but forced many of the common people out of work.
When Edward was just 15 years old, he fell sick with the measles and shortly thereafter with smallpox. This illness damaged his lungs to the point where it was obvious that he did not have long to live. Fearing that he would be succeeded by his half-sister Mary, a devout Catholic, he claimed that Mary and his other half-sister Elizabeth were both illegitimate because the marriages of their mothers to King Henry VIII had been annulled, whereas his mother had died while still married to Henry. Edward and his council wrote a will whereby the crown would be transferred to his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, a devoted Protestant. The people of England did not accept Jane as the legitimate queen and protested that Mary should rightfully be on the throne. The members of Edward's council changed sides and started supporting Mary. Mary assumed the throne and had the 16-year-old Jane Grey executed. We will examine Queen Mary's attempts to bring the Catholic Church back to England in the next episode of The Adventures of George Washington. Thank you for watching. If you found the content useful or entertaining, please subscribe. Please see this video's description for additional information, including a list of references.